Welcome back, everybody, to the Marketing Rules podcast. And it's my pleasure to welcome on board today Ashely Cooper. Ashely, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. You're a little bit different to some of the other kind of guests we have on. That you're an actual recruiter, as opposed to kind of a tech supplier or someone trying to kind of sell their services, which is great because this is what we want, kind of more people like you on the to kind of give their opinion. For those out there who haven't heard of you, Ashely, maybe you can give us a little bit about your kind of background and what you do now.
I'm a recruiter. I'm quite proud of just that job title's fine. I work at the moment with an organisation that are based out of Kenya called Copper. I'm a contractor there doing some process engineering, some recruiting, some general what recruiters do to move the needle. I've spent a lot of time in the last 6 years in-house roles, doing ATS changes, doing kind of unblocking pipelines, looking at problems, being tasked with hiring babies up in the tempo. And prior to that, I spent 16 years in recruitment agencies. So I'm kind of like an in-house recruiter, but really I've got an agency mindset because I don't think you lose that. You don't lose the connection, and you also, if you're contracting like me, you're sort of still doing BD. You're still looking for contract work.
Yeah. Well, because that was going to be my question. So, what's the difference in your mind? Between because you see you've got this kind of agency mindset. So, what is that difference?
Okay, so unless you've done both, most people just don't get it, right? Because it's in agency land, you can kind of pick and choose your clients, pick and choose your assignments, but you also have only got say level 1 access to be able to influence stakeholders, to be able to change the parameters of a role, to be able to so you basically get a brief and you're looking for somebody, and if you can't find anybody, you give up and get another client. That's agency kind of 101. Good agencies then go deeper and say, look, we could sell you a retainer, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and we're special, and please, give us an assignment on a sole basis. And then you've got kind of, let's say, level 2 access to changing things and maneuvering the data around. But when you're internal, you've got kind of level 10 access. Like if you get to be the person that says to the hiring manager, look, you've been unrealistic, or you're not going to find somebody like that. And provided you give them the evidence and not just trying to make, if you say, look, we've looked here, here, and here, this doesn't exist. Oh, okay, let's change it then. Let's just change it to this. So you get a different level of access to make the job easier for yourself. So it's not so much that you're the same recruiter. It's not whether you're any better or any worse than an agency recruiter. You just get to be able to mold the parameters of the job to make it easier to fill it. So it's much more exciting, and it's probably less rewarding, but yeah.
And so, what's that kind of mindset difference? Because obviously, you said that you bring that kind of agency mindset to in-house. Is that simply because as a kind of a gun for hire for a certain extent, you've got to do your own kind of bit. You've got to figure out and find your kind of own clients to work with, or is it?
You've got
Or is it
that.
you bring in?
Yeah, there is that, and there is also, you still have, if you've got an agency mindset to delivery, you're focused on the outcome, not the process. So you just want, most agencies, certainly agency recruiters I've worked with, and I've had teams working for me back when I was in agency, fairly large teams. Most of them are just sort of, they get the job on, and then they're interested in the money that comes at the end and filling the job. They don't really care what that process is. There's a big whinge factor where, this client wants 15 interviews before they'll hire somebody, but you just end up working with that. But I think a lot of internal recruiters are focused on, that I've worked with, just focused on the process and keeping everybody happy, and not so focused on the outcome. So there's a lack of urgency. You get urgency, which is sometimes a little bit over enthusiastic from agency recruiters, where they push, and then people say, oh, recruiters are pushy. It's because they don't see the middle bit. They're just pushing to this fee at the end.
Mhm.
Whereas when you're internal, you get tangled up in that process in the middle and forget that your job is there. You've got to you want to get somebody to the end as quickly as possible. You don't need to sort of fluff around. And that's generally where my role sits, is in that middle piece, getting rid of all the fluff and getting rid of all the kind of useless bits of stuff and saying, how quickly can we get this candidate who I think is good to the end?
But you also described, I mean, you were kind of very honest about it. You describe yourself as a kind of a recruiter, but then your description says that you kind of go way deeper into a business. So I think more than just, and I'm saying just a recruiter, right? But you kind of have, from your description, it's much more kind of process driven within that business. It's most you're kind of driving for change within these kind of businesses, not just through the kind of recruiting, which might be just seen as taking candidate A and filling that role. There seems to be other kind of facets to what you're doing with in an in-house role, that as opposed to just candidate and role. Right, that seems to be more than you're doing.
Yeah, but I think you have your own set of internal KPIs and metrics that you want to kind of hit. And when you've worked in sort of several, obviously, when you're working as an agency recruiter, you're working for lots of different clients. So you get exposure to lots of different processes. When you then go internally, you kind of know what works and what doesn't. And if it's not right, you kind of get the opportunity to say, hey, look, I want to get these KPIs. I want to get 30 good applications. I want to screen six. I want the hiring manager to see five, and I want to make a hire. And if I start that, the start of that piece is how attractive is this role? How attractive are the company? And this is where marketing comes in, because you're not going to get your 30 candidates apply. And I'm not going to say the difference between reaching out and people applying organically. I prefer if people apply organically, they're already bought into some sort of engagement level to say, hey, I like the look of this company, I'm going to apply. If I reach out to people and try and pull them into the process, so a lot of the work that you do that's maybe just deeper than saying, hey, just get a bunch of candidates and screen them and make sure they're and handhold them through, is making sure that the first part of that funnel is, are we attractive? That's the first thing I say to hiring managers. Would you want this job? If you look at it, sometimes you think, actually no, because it doesn't really look like anything different to anything else out there, and it doesn't look interesting to those, not the people that are desperate to find a job, but the people that are casually looking. Which, different studies say it's high percentages of people are always looking over the fence at what's there. If it looks attractive, people apply. And I've applied those numbers and they work, so I very rarely pull people into the process. I'd rather just say, hey, let's create the best we can, show it, people apply. And that requires a level of re engineering and a level of reframing that often doesn't exist in businesses. And you find that when you go in.
Yeah. So you get involved in what would be the kind of the EVP and the employer branding as well. That's kind of, you think that that's what kind of sits within your kind of remit
I
as well.
think so, yeah. And I think also, if you've got, I don't know, if you've got Google, Coca-Cola, whatever, you don't really need your EVP is just an inheritance of your brand, right? So, and most people are like, well, I'd love to work for Google. They're the best at what they do or whatever. There's this perception, and you don't really have to do a lot of work. So when you're working with a startup that's just out the ground and they don't really have any brand equity at all that you can sort of tap into, the only you have to build EVP around why it would be good for somebody to work there, and how you treat people is probably the biggest marker. So, get back to everyone. Don't put these things that say, hey, if you apply, we'll get back to you if you're suitable, or stuff like that. Get back to everybody. Be different, because that's where you're building this EVP yourself in your own actions, because you don't have an inherited brand that people are going to say, this looks great. So you attack that from the bottom up, instead of dragging down this reputational brand that big companies get.
Yeah. I mean, that all makes kind of complete sense. But it's an interesting that it's a role that you've decided to take on, because I know a lot of kind of in-house recruiters who are, they're there to recruit. They don't want to kind of necessarily feel that it's their position to get involved with the larger strategic kind of positioning of the business.
I think it happens. It's very. akin to wherever you're working. I've worked in a number of places, certainly startups, where I've been the recruiter, and that way you can get to try this stuff out. You haven't got, this is where you kind of form those ideas, and where you get, I think when I've gone to places where there's been large recruitment teams and there's a frustration around the way they do things and you want to change it, most recruiters think they can't change it. They think that, and they get answers from people around, you know, oh, we've always done it like this. And people, oh, okay, so we just have to do it. No, you don't have to, but nobody tells you that. You have to kind of push. So if you're happy to just kind of go along, and you know what your metrics are, your own kind of KPIs that you monitor for your own activity, if you're happy to screen 1,000 people and hire one, well, good luck. I'm not. I want to screen five and hire one. So I want to try and drive the business towards an operating model that, or certainly influence, if I'm working in a larger org, if I get as a business partner to a particular area, I want to influence that particular area, and then when it works, I can showcase it to the rest of the business and say, "Hey, we do things differently here." And that subtle changes, like putting pictures, putting images into job descriptions, using blogs instead of job descriptions. I've tried so many different things that have worked, and I've tried things that haven't. But obviously, when if you're in control of it, you can only publish the ones that work.
And it's interesting you mentioned the blog, right? Because I think anyone who does know you will know you because of kind of your blog, which is it's really popular. And one of the things you talk around on there around kind of recruiter success and how what luck plays into that kind of process. And it would be good if you can kind of take us around some of your thoughts around that, because I think it's it's really interesting, and it is quite kind of insightful on kind of your position on that.
I think luck has always played a part, and there's loads of articles on luck and what luck is, and I remember going into an agency once as one of my first jobs, and that there was a kind of thing that people give you a load of clients when you arrive, but they give you basically the people that don't deal with us. So you get this little database of clients, and they're yours, and you're like, okay, you've got to nurture this. And after a few phone calls, you realise that actually this is all like dead wood, but you've got nothing else to go on. So then, going back to this story, there was a client within this group that phoned up, got a flea in the ear about we would never use your agency again, and being a bit younger then, and thinking on my feet, I said, look, that's the whole reason I'm calling. I'm the person that turns things around, and I know we haven't done things great in the past, and I'd love an opportunity just to come and talk about that, and so we can learn. And suddenly I got this client, and then all of a sudden, like, fast forward a year, and you've done a rake of placements, made a load of money off this client, and everyone's like, oh yeah, you were lucky getting that client. It's like, well, I kind of generated that bit of luck myself with a bit of quick thinking. I wasn't lucky getting it because somebody was giving it away because it was a problem account. So I think I could quite easily not called that one because I'd already made 10 calls and had a flea in the ear, and then, so, you're lucky because you put the effort in and you just went through the whole list. It's like, if I'm sourcing and I am looking for a candidate and there's a list of 100 and I get down to number 10 and I still haven't found someone, I know recruiters that would just give up and say, oh, this list is rubbish. But, number 50 is the one you want. I think you kind of make luck by just digging in and following your own kind of process, but following it through and being honest with yourself following it through, because the luck is generated from the amount of activity you do, maybe not from the quality of it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm of the position that you generate your own luck, right? Like you said, you put the if you're smart enough and you put the time in, you put the hard work in, and you are kind of you've got a bit of kind of subtlety about you. You're gonna get there, right? But it's something's gonna always gonna happen. And this is I talk about this a lot to some of our clients. It's something will always turn up, just because there's kind of an attitudinal kind of thing that generates that, whether it's luck or whether it's just you were going to get there anyway, right? At some point, something was going to happen.
Yeah, exactly that. So it's like, we've had 10 people interviewed for this role and nobody's got it. It's like the 11th one is the one. So, okay, so you need to find 11 if you want to hire one. If that's your numbers, that's your numbers. I mean, just understand it. And I often think that common sense sort of plays a big part. It's like if I'm matching something, and how can 20, 30, 100 people be wrong if they're matching so what am I missing? So it's just whether you're inquisitive enough to kind of go under the hood, or whether you're just accepting that, oh, I'm advertising this job and nobody's applying, or the people are all wrong. It's like everybody can't be wrong. There's something wrong with what you've done. So kind of change it and move it and A/B test things and kind of move into that place
Yeah.
where
Yeah,
you
I
where
mean,
you
it's that kind
create.
of you kind of doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, right? It's that kind of
Yeah,
role,
exactly.
right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
One of the other things you kind of talk around a lot is recruiter as a job title, and the kind of credence you put on it, opposed to kind of other people who are in similar positions who maybe kind of try to rebrand themselves as something else that maybe they're not, for all kinds of different reasons. And again, it would be good if you can kind of talk around that a little bit as well.
I think depending on the context of whether you're managing a big team or whether you're just managing a business unit and doing some recruitment, or a company or whatever, a recruiter is a recruiter. And I know there's little kind of slices off that, like he's a sourcer, he's a this, he's a talent acquisition manager. I don't like singling out agencies because I've spent a long time there, but but they're the worst for it, right? So you've got somebody with 3 years experience, and they send you an email and it says, you're looking for this blockchain engineer, and we want to help, and I'm the head of blockchain. I'm like, okay. And then I go on your LinkedIn and it's like head of blockchain. I'm thinking you've kind of lost credibility straight away, because you're kind of trying to assimilate what you think we want to see, you know, by calling yourself head of block. These internal kind of job titles don't really mean anything. If you come to me and say, hey, look, I'm a recruiter in blockchain, just place 50 people, or whatever, that's more likely for me to sort of say, oh, okay, this person, than somebody that's sort of throwing out a bit of smoke and mirrors around their job title,
Mhm.
giving themselves a fancy director of technology. And I'm like, I mean, there's no problem with starting your own company, right, and making yourself the CEO. But in context, if you're, my blog, if I'm the editor in chief for my blog, that's not going to get me a role at the Daily Mirror. So I don't know. I think that we should just be a bit more honest. There seems to be like a kind of, oh, I'm a recruiter. It's like, oh, actually, yeah, it's a pretty good job.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of there's a larger kind of question around the kind of perception of recruiters generally at that point. It's almost like they're maybe a bit embarrassed to call themselves a recruiter because there is this kind of notion, and we've talked about it on the podcast before, that there's a bit of secondhand car salesman around. There's a whiff of
There
that,
can be.
right?
Yeah.
There's a whiff of that, and I think kind of that's why we also see it with businesses who try to rebrand themselves not as recruiters but as talent partners or something else. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah.
All of this is trying to get away from that term recruitment, but it's such a widely known and obvious term. I think there's a responsibility on everybody in our space to make it better.
We should own it. I mean, why? I see it. We're not an agency. Well, you are, because you're sending me somewhere and you want me to pay a fee for them. Yeah, but we're not like another agent. We're a talent partner. What does that mean? You know, I think that sometimes just own it. Just be proud that this is actually it's a really important position in most companies, and it's undervalued. And you can see it's undervalued in some because they don't pay very well, but then they might sort of bitch about not getting their hiring targets and all the rest of it. Companies that pay well and get good recruiters on don't suffer from that.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
think the kind of the dichotomy of that though is, I think what you do by calling yourself a recruiter, I think you do more than just a recruitment. To be honest, I think
right?
if you are like we said right at the start, you're doing kind of you're influencing the kind of EVP and the employer branding and maybe even some of the recruitment marketing and that kind of piece, and even maybe internal processes as well. I'd say that's more than recruitment. That's basically. So I think maybe you're underselling yourself to a certain extent as well.
Maybe. I mean, maybe, but it is contextual around the size of company you work in. You know, if you're working with a company that's at 20 and you're growing it to 45, you know, then you've doubled the size, you know, more than doubled the size of the company in a year. But equally, you could be working as a team of 10 and you've just grown a division by that and you wouldn't get the same exposure and kudos. And I think when you work for good TA leaders, and I work for a great one, a great leadership team at the minute, they understand that you need a bit of autonomy to move things down at the ground level so they don't, you know, I think when you I've worked in places where you've got this we've always done it like that mentality, and you can see why it doesn't work, and it creates a bit of churn in things, you know. So I think it's like jacking up your job title. It gets you a foot in the door, but you're going to fail further down the line because you're creating an expectation around something that isn't sort of true. Whereas if you can exceed the expectation by saying, "Hey, I'm just a regular recruiter, but I'll do this and I'll do that," maybe that's, you know, the formula.
Exactly. Ashely, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I'm sure everybody else enjoyed listening to you. If everybody wants to kind of reach out to you, we'll obviously include all your details in the show notes. If anybody wants to read your kind of blog, we'll include a link to that as well. But for now, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Great to be invited on.